Can I tell a naughty story, boys? Matt Busby said, "Son, you're good enough. I think you should sign professional. I've got a signing on fee for you here." And he slipped him a brown envelope, and there was £300 in it.
Anyway, so I thought there's only one thing to do. I have got to chase the truck.
1963 Boxing Day was the most remarkable Boxing Day in top-flight English history.
Blackpool 1, Chelsea 5, Burnley 6, Manchester United 1.
So, Chelsea put in goal central defender David Webb. And top flight game, 1971, and a defender had to go in goal like a park game.
I said, "Happy Christmas, Roy. Thank you for this. It really means a lot." And he said, "Don't forget, when you get out there, you're just one of those bastards again."
Hi gang, it's a different kind of podcast today because Martin and I are reminiscing about old Christmases and actually reminiscing about current Christmases as well. So we're going from back then right up to now. So sit around, watch it, listen it. Patreon if you want to get involved, substack.com if you want to see the writing, and subscribe and like, and oh God, let's get on with it.
They know what to do.
The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for a shot in! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, Merry Christmas if you're watching before Christmas. If you're watching after Christmas, hope you had a good one.
The Joy of New Year.
The Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett, is talking Christmas this week.
It's lovely, isn't it? I love Christmas. I know it maybe not be everybody's cup of tea, and it obviously depends on your own circumstances, whether it's a time of year for your family or maybe not. But it feels special, and all my life, and Neil and I, we do disagree about a few things, which I hope that makes this podcast worthwhile. But I love football at Christmas, and you're going to find out quite a few experiences I had at football at Christmas. And Neil would rather be in the pub.
Well, I think if you're going to have a mid-season break, it should be between Christmas and New Year, and people should actually spend time with their families and their loved ones and their friends and their pets.
Yeah, go and live in Germany then. You'll get that then. Most European countries.
The team I support doesn't play in Germany, unfortunately. Although we have had rather a lot of success there, but that's another story.
Yes.
Right, okay. What we're going to do, we're going to take our Christmas experiences in order of calendar. And therefore, Martin's going to start because, of course, he is rather older than me.
Yes, I am the older of this very old pair. And but I look in the mirror sometimes, and I look at Neil, and I think, well, people might look at it the other way.
Well, you're going to start in 1953, which is actually Christmas 1953. I think I was about 4 months old.
Well, I was at Boxing Day 8. And what a year 53 was. Of course, it was the coronation of the late, great Queen Elizabeth II.
Who did she play for?
You stumped me there. And talking of stumps, England won the Ashes for the first time since back in the pre-Second World War. Everest was climbed. It was a really special year, and not that registered very much with the 8-year-old little Tyler, who set off on a bus with his next door neighbour's older son, older than me. He was probably about 11. His name was David White, and I'm always grateful to him because he said, "Do you want to go to football on Saturday?" And I went, "Oh yeah." And he took me, and the parents of both families were quite happy. We caught the bus, which from our little place, in a place called New Hall, which is round sort of Addleston, Woking way, between, it's a Surrey, northern Surrey place, not a huge place. Anyway, there was a bus route, and it went straight to the football ground, which it doesn't anymore, because I tried to redo the journey for Woking Football Club as a sort of memento of all that time, because of course, it's over 70 years now, but when it was 70, I wanted to do it for the anniversary, but you couldn't do it on the bus. Anyway, we did. And I just remember being enchanted by Woking won 4-1, which was obviously something that started a lifelong supporting of Woking, and ending up also actually doing a bit of coaching. Ended up playing against them and played for the reserves. But so that was it was a very special time. At the time, did I realise that? I'm sure I was enchanted by it, but I didn't know quite where it would lead me, into your kitchen in Kingston all these years later, which is a privilege. And so it's a December memory. It was in the week leading up to Christmas, so whether it was a Christmas treat or whatever, I certainly managed to get my pocket money extended so that I had enough to go in. But I didn't buy a programme. I've got a collection of working programmes, and I only got the programme for this match about 2 years ago on eBay. Yeah, I always wanted it because of the significance of it. 4-1, red and white halves, which I still wear today.
Did you fall in love with the player?
I always liked the goal scorers, and Woking is the start of a fantastic relationship between Woking and a player called Charlie Mortimer. Whose younger brother John played for your club, Chelsea, and played for Woking as well. And he was on target in that game, and he ended up Woking's all-time record goal scorer. And played as an amateur. There was a distinction then, as there was even when I was playing 20 years later. That was abolished finally. Everybody would be professional. Everybody could get paid. But he was a perfect amateur because he was a school teacher, and he had played for Aldershot in I guess it would be the 3rd Division South then, and done very well, but as an amateur.
Yeah.
And there's one famous occasion during his career, I think it must have been just after this. He played at White Hart Lane on Christmas Day, I think, for Portsmouth. One game. But he was that good. They were obviously short of somebody. Woking weren't playing on that Christmas Day.
Well, teams used to do that in the 50s.
Yeah, and Chelsea had a lot, didn't they, when they won the title?
Seamus O'Connell played.
Jim Lewis
was absolutely significant in them winning the league title in 1951. Can I tell a naughty story about?
Well, it's your podcast as much as mine, Neil, so please.
Can I tell a naughty story, boys?
How naughty?
It's about your club.
Oh, right, you didn't.
Our producer, who's a Manchester United supporter, Billy Reid, says he'd rather I didn't tell it, so I'm going to. Seamus O'Connell, who was from a millionaire family that had a farmer's market, a cattle market up in Carlisle, played for Chelsea the year that Chelsea won the league, won the Amateur Cup, the FA Amateur Cup 4 times, 3 times with Bishop Auckland, and one with somebody else up in the northeast. But he played for Manchester United very well on a handful of occasions only. And after one game, he was going to get a taxi back to the main station on what street? Piccadilly, that's right. And he came out from the dressing room, and Matt Busby was sitting there in a taxi, manager, and he said, "Get in, I'll give you a lift." And in those days, the signing on fee ceiling was £100. And in the taxi on the way back to Piccadilly, Matt Busby said, "Son, you're good enough. I think you should sign professional. We will offer you a contract to sign professional." And he said, "I've got my business and my family business, and it's not on my agenda." He said, "Well, we're willing to do it, and I've got a signing on fee for you here." And he slipped him a brown envelope, and there was £300 in it, not 100. Matt Busby. Goody Matt Busby.
Well, no, but that was the way football was managed then. And of course, they were on £20 a week.
I know.
So that money was a fortune, really.
Yeah, but it was a breach of the rules. And
if he was the only person, and we're going on hearsay here.
It was Seamus who told me, the late Seamus, about the late Sir Matt. Listen.
All right, your sources are always impeccable, Neil. So I'm not going to.
I'm
not going to question that.
Do I think that every other manager wasn't doing it? No, I don't. Of course they were. So if they could afford it, so I'm not. It's just
the secret of management is getting the best players.
Yeah.
And sometimes lines have to be blurred in that respect. But Seamus didn't. He stuck to his.
Yeah, no, he stayed. Well, it was a millionaire. It was a millionaire concern up in Carlisle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There weren't too many millionaire footballers in those days.
No.
Compared to now. The ratio has changed a
lot. I first met him in a golf club bar in Malaga. Not that I've ever played golf in my life, but that's where he wanted to meet me. He was living out there when he retired. So he had a good life. Seamus, good man. Right, okay, Martin's first game, 1953. We've got two Christmas Day or Christmas period stories from 1957, so I'll go first. 1958 was the last year that Christmas Day was a football day in the top flight in this country. 1957 was very typical for my club of the kind of Christmas that a lot of clubs experienced at this time. It was Chelsea versus Portsmouth. It was the year that Jimmy Greaves was playing his first season. Of course, is the record scorer in English top-flight football. Alan Shearer gets wielded out every week on Match of the Day, Premier League leading scorer, 260 goals. Jimmy Greaves got 357 top-flight goals in the old Division 1.
Alan got 20-odd for Southampton, didn't he, in the top flight? But he doesn't factor that in because being top Premier League scorer is a wonderful thing, and he's had a wonderful career. But if you relegate yourself behind Jimmy Greaves by widening the issue, it perhaps takes the gloss off it.
It was his first season, so he made his debut as a 17-year-old in the first game of the season at White Hart Lane, scored, where, of course, he was to become more legendary than anywhere else, probably, Jimmy Greaves in his career, White Hart Lane. But this was for Chelsea, scored in a 1-1 draw. He played about 16 games, and then he got left out, as youngsters often do, and he came back on Christmas Day against Portsmouth. And Chelsea won 7-4. And he got 4 goals, and he was on his way, and he got 22 league goals that season. And in 4 seasons at Chelsea, he got 130-something goals. And I mean, he was just incredible. But the real point of this story is that in those days, you played on Christmas Day and on Boxing Day. And it was often the reverse fixture.
Always,
on
wasn't
Boxing
it?
Day.
Yeah.
And so both sets of players went to the same train station, I think it was Victoria, got on the train and went down to Portsmouth. And the following day...
It would be Waterloo.
Probably.
It
would be Waterloo,
yeah.
Quite. And at Fratton Park the next day, after Chelsea 7, Portsmouth 4, it was Portsmouth 3, Chelsea 0. So on aggregate, it was 7-all. And both teams got 2 points, because it was only 2 points for a win in those days. But it wasn't just Christmas Day football. It was the 2 times that you played the team against you. It was in consecutive days in those years. It was unbelievable.
It's not one of my stories, this, but my family on my mother's side of Chester, and Chester will get a mention later on, but they played around this time. They played Millwall as their Christmas fixture, and the players did exactly what you said. They got on the train back up to the northwest. Millwall to their hotel, Chester to their families, and they played again the next day. And that was the game that I went to see. It was 0-0, I remember that.
But you've got a 1957 story.
Well, yeah, actually, just before, it was the week leading up to the 21st of December, and I'm not going to go into huge detail here because we've mentioned it a lot on the podcast. The shortest day, December the 21st, and that's evident in the fact that there's not a lot of archive material in the game which I call the greatest game never seen, which was Charlton 7, Huddersfield 6. And we've gone into the details, but if you've not heard it before, no subs, Charlton the man down, Captain Derek Ufton with a dislocated shoulder after 15 minutes. So they played 75 minutes with 10 men against Huddersfield, who were managed by Bill Shankly, who was on his way to becoming one of the great managers of all time. And because of the Christmas schedule that you rightly mentioned, the game thick and fast, they left out a 17-year-old who might have made a difference called Dennis Law, who sat alongside Shankly and watched the game and had to, presumably his ears warmed by the comments when Huddersfield lost a 5-1 lead in the last half an hour. It went 6-5 Charlton and then 6-all, and then right at the end, in the very gathering gloom, and there's no photos of it I can find in the archives anywhere, a guy called John Ryan scored the winning goal for Charlton, and they invaded the pitch, the fans, which never
Were there
happened.
floodlights in the by
No
then?
floodlights, no. 2:15 kickoff. So it was very dark. So dark that the hero, a guy called Johnny Summers, scored 5 goals. And there's lots of trimmings to this story about keeping him. He scored 5 goals. He changed his boots at half-time to new boots. The left-footed player scored all 5 goals with his right foot in his new boots. And was wheeled out in the director's box to take the acclaim of the crowd for this astonishing feat. And there's no photos of that either, again, because it was probably pitch black. And then he went off to the BBC to be interviewed on one of their sports news programmes. It's just an amazing game. We're working on, within the podcast and with widening the search, to try and get a special programme made. It deserves a legacy. And there's a lot of nuances that I could go on about here, but I would rather save those for the programme when we get there. We're working hard. Fantastic cooperation from those at Charlton. Everybody I've tried to speak to has been very supportive of the project, and telling young people about this game. They get us wide-eyed. So it's not a sort of, I better tell you that football did exist before the Premier League. It's not that. It's just an amazing story, and I stand by the title, The Greatest Game Never Seen.
The Valley.
The
Big,
Valley.
big stadium before.
Yeah,
seating.
I have had some access to a Charlton game that was covered by the BBC, and I'm very grateful to the BBC. Who have sort of opened their archives, and people have been looking on my behalf. They've been really helpful. I have seen a game that was covered a year earlier, which gives us a flavour of what the Big Bank at the Valley was like. The pitch was just total mud and no lights, and the football was of the time, and that's important, and I hope that will be part of the programme. We're working hard, and the BBC I must thank very warmly, because that's a real big element to the story and the programme, which we hope to bring you at a future date, but not too far into the future.
We jump on to 1962, and this was, if ever there was a warning that climate change was coming, it was 1962 Boxing Day.
Yeah, I mentioned Chester, and I would go to watch Chester if they were at home over the Christmas, where it was the first team, as I did with the Millwall game, but it was a few years later. And they were at home the reserves were at home, when reserve football was reserve football then, and the first team still didn't have substitutes, so they might take an extra body in case somebody was sick. So there'd be 12 going with the first team and a professional staff of about 40. So to get into the reserves was a pretty win. So the standard was very good. And they played Wrexham reserves, big rivalry. Chester, Wrexham, just across the border. I was born about a mile in the Chester side of the border, and I do have a great grandmother who's Welsh, so I guess I felt the rivalry a little bit. But it was a game. I think Wrexham reserves won, from what I remember. But what I do remember is my dad, who didn't like football, coming to pick me up from the ground. We were sort of about 3 or 4 miles outside of Chester, so I didn't have any transport, and it was Boxing Day, so there wasn't much transport. So he came and picked me up outside the old stadium, Sealand Road, and it started to snow. And that snow stayed on the ground up and down the country until the end of February, early March. And it was the big freeze. It absolutely finished any kind of sport. There were 1 or 2 clubs tried things, putting braziers on the pitch. I think Leicester might have been inventive. I think they had something like a hot air balloon. They got their games played, which came up when Leicester won the league, because Leicester's nearest chance of winning the league was the 62-63 season. But they ended up having to play a number of away games at the end, because they played all their home games, and that sort of caught them out, and they didn't make it. But I just remember thinking, oh, well, this is just a bit of snow. Nice, it's just after Christmas, but within a week, I was cursing the weather forecast, and I was sitting there. It was like, and it's not comparing, because obviously COVID was very serious, but it was that kind of isolation that you had. And as a teenager, it didn't sit nicely, I'm afraid. I said, the games are off, the games are off, the games are off, the games are off. Week after week after week. It was, and for a football crazy people, the whole football family were just tearing their hair out, really.
Yep. I agree. Very bad time. I'm going forward a year, 1963. 1963 Boxing Day. So we had no Christmas Day, of course, football by now. 1963 Boxing Day was the most remarkable Boxing Day in top flight English history. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get Martin to read the scores. Now, before he does it, I think you have just one historic experience of reading the scores.
Yes, it was for ITV, so I guess it might have been the late 80s, something like that. And I don't know how it happened, but I was in the studio that afternoon and I was asked to read the football results. And it was a big thing, the football results. All growing up, the radio was telling you, that was the only way you could do it. And we had the football pools where people were checking whether they picked the right result and things like that. So it was a responsibility, which I didn't take lightly, I promise you. But I did mess up on one, and it was they had the non-league teams in those days as part of the football results, and a team that's still in existence called Erith and Belvedere, a non-league team in Kent. I called them Erith, and I was roundly criticised from the Kent fraternity. But also, you don't like to make mistakes. But it reminded me of and I can't tell you his name because it would be unfair, but a very famous broadcaster on another sport, associated with one sport in particular, but did some football as well. Working for what is now Radio 5, they used the older viewers might remember this. They used to give the racing results at the end of every day, racing every day. Always at about 7:30, 25 past 7, you got the racing result. And everybody had to do it. The top man at the time at the BBC Radio said, no, you might be a football commentator, you might be this, you might do career. You have to do your stint. But he deliberately read it badly. And he was never asked again. So I didn't deliberately, but I was never asked again until you asked me now, Neil.
Right, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen and everybody else, here are the football results from Boxing Day 1963.
Blackpool 1, Chelsea 5, Burnley 6, Manchester United 1, Fulham 10, Ipswich Town 1, Leicester City 2, Everton 0, Liverpool 6, Stoke City 1, Nottingham Forest 3, Sheffield United 3, Sheffield Wednesday 3, Bolton Wanderers 0, West Bromwich Albion 4, Tottenham Hotspur 4, West Ham United 2, Blackburn Rovers 8, Wolverhampton Wanderers 3, Aston Villa 3.
I mean, the most goals scored in
66, I think it is.
In a day in top flight football in England. The Fulham 10, Ipswich 1 scoreline is interesting. Graham Leggett, the Scottish right winger of Fulham, got a hat-trick in 3 minutes. That has since been beaten just once by Sadio Mane, who got a hat-trick for Southampton before he joined Liverpool in something like 2 minutes 56 seconds.
I knew Graham Leggett. He became an outstanding broadcaster in Canada.
Yes,
and there were great connections between Scotland and Canada. I think whether he moved, I think he might have moved out at the end of his play. He was a very, very good player.
He was I remember him very well.
He was a winger who could play centre forward, but he was not tall. He was a real goal scorer and a really charming man. And we were at a few World Cups together. He was working for his TV channel, and I was working for whoever I was employed by at the time. Great company, and we spent a lot of time talking about those years and those players. What I should do, Neil, is I won't give all the results, but 2 days later...
Well, I was going to give them all.
Oh, right.
Okay. I mean, it's remarkable because Chelsea, having won 5-1 at Blackpool, won 1-0 at home. Sheffield United versus Nottingham Forest, which have been 3-3 on Boxing Day. Forest won away 2-1. Tottenham having drawn 4-4 at West Bromwich Albion, lost 2-0 at home. Arsenal who were away to Birmingham.
They hadn't played. Arsenal hadn't.
No, they hadn't.
Because it was there was one game missing. That was 10 games in Boxing
So
Day.
it must have been postponed probably
Yeah.
for weather. Arsenal won 4-1 at Birmingham, but the absolutely two unbelievable ones were West Ham having lost 8-2, which is still their biggest home defeat.
Yeah.
Having lost 8-2 at home to Blackburn, went to Blackburn and won 3-1, and Blackburn were top of the league at the time. And Ipswich, having lost 10-1 at Fulham, won 4-2 at Portman Road against Fulham. Aston Villa Wolves was another draw from 3-3 to 2-2. Leicester 2, Everton 0 became Everton 0, Leicester 3. Leicester were a good team back then, with Gordon Banks in goal and Frank McClintock, who was the captain of Arsenal when they won the
They could have won the league the season before.
Yeah.
With the big freeze, they were a decent side.
And of course, Burnley, who had won the league in 1960 and were a top side, who had beaten Manchester United 6-1 on Boxing Day, lost 5-1 at Old Trafford. I mean, it's unbelievable, these complete changes. How can it happen?
Well, I think those days maybe the dietary requirements weren't as strict as possibly they would be in the top level of football today. I don't know. The players of that time, some are still with us. I'm sure they would tell us a little story about what they ate or maybe drank over the Christmas period.
Exactly.
And there were no substitutes, so if people got injured and played 2 games back to back, there might have been stories that affected the balance of some of those particular games. But I think after that, it's often said that the game changed in terms of these ridiculous scorelines. And one of the reasons, I think, was that pragmatic football came in, which probably started to some extent with Sir Alf Ramsey, or Alf Ramsey, who won the league with Ipswich, and then
1962.
Yeah, and then brought
the World Cup.
And brought England into a more functional style, wingless wonders.
I think it's right to say as well that before dietary knowledge was brought to footballers, Jimmy Greaves, who I've spoken about, the scorer of the most goals, and I'm not sure anyone else has got over 300. He got 357 in the top
all
flight.
in the top division of English football.
And he lived in Essex. And from 17 to 21 when he was a Chelsea player, and for a Saturday 3:00 afternoon kickoff, he would leave home, go to a cafe in central London and have a roast lunch, a full roast lunch, before going and scoring 2, 3, 4, 5 goals.
He used to give Terry Venables the lift, or Terry Venables was part of that, and Terry would go, "We got to get to the game, I've got to eat."
Yeah, I know.
But it is, they've learned so much, but I don't know. Sometimes you've got to pile yourself with protein, haven't you? So it worked for Jim. Are you going to tell me he would have scored 500 goals if he'd had a better diet? I doubt it.
One other Jimmy Greaves story from around this stage while I'm on it. He played 57 times for England. He got 44 goals, which I think is pretty much the highest ratio of goals per game of anyone who's played for England. And he told me he was on penalties for about 50 of those games, and he never took one penalty for England, because in those days you could go through a player to get the ball, and as long as you got the ball, it wasn't a foul. And therefore, to get those kind of figures, you had to be fast. You had to be fast-footed, because the defenders were killers.
And they just weren't awarded so regularly, I don't think. I mean, there wasn't so much intensity on the performance of the referees, and therefore that's led to this justification of we're trying to do our very best to make less mistakes. People just accepted it. But I'm sure when I went in 1953 to my first Woking game, there would be people shouting at the referee. Because it's not new. It's not new. But maybe the skins have got a bit thinner since then.
Let's move on to the end of the 60s and 1968.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit selfish to squeeze this in, but it did affect my Christmas day, because I was picked to make my... I played for the first team in non-competitive games at Corinthian Casuals, which was the level where you were talking about Seamus O'Connell, Jim Lewis, the Isthmian League. There was no national league or conference at those days. So it was a very good league, but I wasn't a very good player. But I was in it, and so I got the chance to play in a competitive game. It was the Surrey Senior Cup, the Corinthian Casuals, away to Carshalton Athletic, two clubs that still exist today. And Carshalton now have an artificial surface, of which I'm not a fan of, as people listening to this podcast would know. But it might as well have been an artificial surface. It was an 11 o'clock kickoff on Boxing Day. So you imagine, unlike some of the players we might have been talking about a few years earlier in the gold-glutted turkey-filled footballers of that time, I did everything possible to not overindulge and everything, to give myself the marginal gains that I needed to be anywhere in the same envelope as most of the players I was playing with or playing against. And so I got there full of excitement, and I was supposed to be one sub. So it started 66, I think, 65, 66 was when Keith Peacock of Charlton Athletic became the first sub in the Football League. So I was the sub. But we had a player who had a first-class honours degree from Oxford University, a man of brilliant brain power, so bright that he'd gone to our home ground when it was an away game. So the sub had to start. And, of course, it was. But I was Bambi on ice. It was awful. And... eventually he turned up. The manager, we interviewed David Pleat, didn't we? And David Pleat was talking about playing for England in this European tournament. England won in 63, I think. And the manager, my manager for this game, was the same guy who actually left David out of the team for after the first two games. A guy called Pat Welton, who was very kind to me, but on this particular day, I wasn't the solution, as the managers would say today. But I played, and I played as a starter, so it went down in the record books as that, and we lost. So it was a mixed,
have you got the programme?
It was a next day. Yeah, I have. Yeah, and it's got me down as a sub, of course. So, yeah, I've kept some of the programme, but. The ones that are nice are when you're playing against people who went on. I mentioned John Lacey, who played for Fulham and Spurs after that, and I ended up commentating on playing the cup final. And to be, I was the number 9 on one team, he was the number 5 on the other team. In those days, you knew who was going to mark you, who was going to, make it a difficult afternoon. So, but it is a memory, a Boxing Day memory, and I'm commentating this day on Boxing Day. But I know that if frost kicks in, the pitch that I'm going to Wolves Man United, and the pitch there will be pristine, and the game will go ahead. Nobody will be embarrassed, and actually, I think everyone will go to the right ground as well. But he got first-class honours degree, and he couldn't work out. There were only 2 choices. We played. He picked the wrong one.
We've had a lot of prime ministers in my lifetime who got first-class honours degrees.
Yeah, I think you made your point, Neil, very well.
I did think earlier on, I didn't say, when you mentioned the Charlton player going off in 1957 with a dislocated shoulder, that David Pleat, when he was on, told us that for 2 games or something, he was the first team trainer, as it was called, the equivalent of the physio at Luton, and he had to deal with a dislocated shoulder, and he didn't know what to do because he had no training whatsoever in those days. So goodness knows.
I think Derek Ufton, his name was, captain of Charlton, very very well known at the Valley. And I think it was well into double figures that he dislocated his shoulder. So he probably knew better to do with it than the surgeon. But they put him, a famous story that when he was at the hospital, his dad took him there, went the ambulance with him, and as they were about to put him out to put the shoulder back in, how are we doing? Well, we're losing 5-1. And he came round. He must have thought he was not round in the world that he'd returned to. We won 7-6. Wow.
Right, we're going to go into the 1970s, 1971 Boxing Day. This is how much football has changed. On Boxing Day 1971, I think there were newspapers on Boxing Day then. Well, there probably are now.
I think there are now, yeah.
But news came out that Chelsea had a problem. We were at home to Ipswich, and goalkeeper Peter Bonetti was injured. Backup goalkeeper John Phillips was injured. Youth goalkeeper Steve Sherbert, who had a good career after that, and played in the cup final with Watford in the 1980s.
He was out-jumped by Andy Gray.
Yeah. But he was up near his home, which was somewhere in the northeast, Grimsby, I think he was from, somewhere around there, was being rushed down to play in the game. But he didn't make it because the public transport or whatever mode of transport he used didn't get him to Stamford Bridge in time. So Chelsea put in goal central defender David Webb, and top flight game 1971, and a defender had to go in goal like a park game, and the crowd was so excited, and he ran out and he ran to the north end of the ground, and when he got into the penalty area, he got down on his knees and prayed, and the whole ground was in hysterics. The score was Chelsea 2, Ipswich 0. Early on in the game, he made a brave save at someone's feet and blocked a shot that went over the bar and celebrated like he scored the winning goal in the 1970 FA Cup final. He celebrated like that. He kept the clean sheet, and at the end, the celebrations and the applause were incredible. But now, can you imagine a Premier League club not having a goalkeeper? You'd loan a goalkeeper probably now. They'd have some emergency rules where you could...
Yeah, but you have to be registered, and of course you might have to play. Arsenal used was he 16 in Europe this season? It was probably fourth choice because of various regulations. In a European game, they played him. And so it does happen. And goalkeeping, it is... Having been involved in coaching at non-league level, it is something you really have to keep an eye on. Have we got backup goals, especially in the holiday period, where registration bodies aren't available really, and sending in a message isn't going to be enough.
The big clubs now all take 3 goalkeepers to a game.
They do, yeah.
And one has to sit in the crowd, or occasionally you see 2 goalkeepers on the bench, which really angers
But he's
me.
a training
Put a youth player on the bench rather than 2 goalkeepers.
Well, they're training goalkeepers, really. They're basically there.
Yeah.
And occasionally they get a game. Well, I think Southampton have used 3 different goalkeepers. Bournemouth have this season. So there is competition.
They've been using a third choice keeper with Ramsdale injured and the Manchester City boy whose name escapes me.
Gavin Zuma. But Alex
injured.
McCarthy's played.
Alex McCarthy. And then they brought in Joe Lumley.
Joe Lumley, who's an experienced championship goalkeeper. And he's played a number of games, but it's not perhaps the job that people are queuing up to do at Southampton. But it happens, and it's not just in England. You do get these stories where either kids get thrown in or a 42-year-old. Peter Bonetti played for Woking, one game I think, 40-something. Yeah. And Hans Sagers, who'd obviously played for Wimbledon, and he had a game or two for it. So you can, if you dig deep enough. Yeah. And we should have asked David Pleat because he had 3 goalkeepers in the same game. I was commentating on it.
Both those old Woking guys became very good goalkeeper coaches, so they had a lot of experience to draw on.
Yeah, and Alex McCarthy played for Woking as well. We're just giving him a mention, so I got to throw that in.
Let's move on to 1974, and a very special occasion.
Yeah, I mean it is. You start. There's a famous saying that my impish, mischievous colleagues at Sky would say, not necessarily to me, but sometimes to me, somebody, you've had 2 games today, and they go, what do you mean? Yeah, first and your last. It was usually in that mischievous tone, and of course, doing your first commentary, you wonder whether you're going to fall into that category of first and your last. I was totally unqualified. My qualification was an obsession with football. I played a bit. I'd had a year or so working through the fortune of knowing somebody who recommended somebody and this, that and the other, working behind the scenes at London Weekend Television with people who were absolutely top of the tree. Brian Moore, Bob Gardner, the director, Jeff Fulser, who went on to have a fantastic, and is still working in the business now. People who gave me a grounding in something that really I didn't know that I would be a football journalist even, you know. I still always said that, I've told the story here about when I was given the chance to go to television, I wanted people to say, no, we need you to keep playing. And they didn't. I don't blame them, they were right. So yeah, the first game was a stopgap for a game on the 28th of December 1974. It was Southampton against Sheffield Wednesday in what would be now the Championship. I did a lot of prep, as you can imagine, but I hadn't seen Sheffield Wednesday. It was very hard with my schedule at work to get to see. But I went to see Southampton on the Boxing Day, and it was I did well to get in. It was Portsmouth away, the derby, and they won. So I got to see that game as prep.
It was also the Southampton team that went on to win the FA Cup.
It was going in that direction, but it was
18 months later.
18, yeah. That's
so Mick Shannon, Peter
but
Osgood.
Mick was suspended or injured. I can't remember. He didn't play, and that made the difference because they lost 1-0. But the luckiest break I had, I think, I found out there's no old hotel in Southampton it's called, I think, the Polygon. It's gone now. The gone part was the true part of it. And that's where I found out Sheffield Wednesday was staying on the night before, on the night of the 27th. And Steve Burtonshaw, not to be confused with Keith Birkinshaw, who was Tottenham manager at the time, Steve Burtonshaw, who'd worked with Arsenal, he was the manager. And I asked if I could see the players having their dinner so I could look at the faces, you know. But we're talking 12, 13 players at the most, as opposed to 23 now if you're doing a team that you've not seen before, you know. Anyway, so he said, well, don't worry about that because we're going to train in the morning. I said, well, on the morning of the match. And he went, yeah, we've travelled a bit. I like that. I like to get them out of the beds and loosened up. And he said, just follow the bus down and you can watch. So I watched Sheffield Wednesday train for half an hour or so, just the avenues. People who know that part of the world, you go into Southampton, this parkland. It wasn't a football pitch. They just sort of took the coach and walked down, did a few stretches, kicked a few balls about, nothing strenuous, but perfect for identification. I mean, I could have spoken to all of them, you know. And they won the game 1-0, and I have mentioned this on the podcast before. Eric Potts, the only player with red hair on the pitch, gave me my first goal shout. But of course, it wasn't a very noisy Dell, which is a small ground. And there were Sheffield Wednesday fans there, but not a lot of them. They were doing terribly in the league. So terribly that this December the 28th, 1974, they did not win another league game all season, which is, I say that all the time when I talk about my first game. And people just go, no, that can't be right. And even now, I go back to the wonderful yearbooks that we've had through my career, which basically started about the time I started, where we got all these reference things long before the internet. And I go back and I check. Surely I'm talking really rubbish here, but they didn't. They didn't win another game in the league all season. Got relegated from the second tier to the third tier. Southampton built their side. They were still in the second division. The next season, and they got to the cup final, and with the Manchester United producers in the room, we have to mention very softly that they won 1-0. Bobby Stokes, and my job on the day afterwards with the cup final was won. How the cup final was won. Great programme done by ITV. I went to Wembley on the bus as the reporter with Southampton, which was a great honour. And of course they won, so I was able to show my face the next day to get them out of bed. Got Mick and Bobby Stokes into the studio for a programme at How the Cup was won, and it was very special. And actually, I've been invited by Southampton to go to a game at the end of January in their hospitality lounge to tell a few of these stories, you know. And I hope there are a couple coming up. Fulham, I went to the year before on the bus. And that will be 50 years in May, and I hope they have some sort of celebration there. And I'll be chipping away at them, saying, "Can I come and see the chaps again?" And of course, in '76, that was Southampton. So, of course, not everyone's still with us. But Bobby Stokes died very young, and so there's some sadness about it. But there are great memories and crystal clear memories of that first game in 1974. How I felt. And the best words that were spoken to me afterwards was, and the producer was a very educated person, not really a football educated person, television, very, very experienced. And he said, well done, old boy. I didn't just do the game. I had to do the links into the other games, Pictures come from Granada Television, commentator Gerald says that, all that sort of stuff. That was all new to me to do, but I had edited. I knew the language of it, really, but to actually perform it. So we did that. So it took a while after the game, and then he just said, "Old boy," not that I felt an old boy at that time. I'm certainly an old boy now. And he said, "We've got another game in 3 or 4 weeks. Would you like to do that?" And that was wonderful. I don't remember anything after that because I was euphoric.
Let's move on to 2 years, because you very nearly mucked up Sheffield United versus Bristol Rovers.
Well, yes. I mean, I mucked up, not the game, but I mucked up my Christmas because I love football. As we said this right at the start, I'm not one of those who believe that there shouldn't be football on Christmas Eve. I think it should be. Why not? And you're going to come on to that, but I watched that game with some of your club's staff, and it was very entertaining. And I don't see any reason why it should be precluded now. But anyway, this was not Christmas Eve, or it was Christmas week. And so I'd gone up to Yorkshire with my bags and done some Christmas shopping. So I was going home to my mum and dad's in Surrey. And so I got driving home for Christmas. That's what I was going to do. And I got in the car, and we'd all stayed on a bit longer. In those days, you'd be invited in the players' lounge. I preferred that to the boardroom. I always loved talking to the players about how did you score that goal? What were you thinking? Was it lucky or what? We've been practicing, all that kind of lovely football chat. Anyway, so it went on too long. So I got in my car and I set off down the M1 south. And then I realised my bag was going north in the truck that I'd left it in.
TV truck.
Well, the TV truck, yeah. So I went, oh my goodness. And it had Christmas presents in it.
And no mobile phone.
No mobile phones. No contact. So all I did was, I must have realised this quite soon. I'm not sure that I went down there. I might have got to, it's a little bit of a drive out of Sheffield, if you know it, to get onto the motorway. Dual carriageway out that side. And anyway, so I thought, there's only one thing to do. I have got to chase the truck. So, I don't know. I mean, it's. I think the statute of limitations would have gone there, wasn't it, nearly 50 years ago. So I drove up the motorway as fast as my vehicle at the time wouldn't have been very chic, I can tell you that. But and I eventually there it was on the horizon. I sort of caught up, and then I did my best as a private citizen to make another vehicle pull over. I had no blue light or anything, but I did flash the indicators, and I kept persistently, obviously looking at me, not realising. I don't think at any point the driver realised that it was me. But he beautifully pulled over, and I jumped out of the car, and I said, "Look, I'm really sorry, but you got my bag in your." He had. I got the bag and got up to the next junction, full of embarrassment, and fortunately looking over my shoulder and not being tracked by anybody. I turned around and went home for Christmas. So I'll never forget that, because it's probably the only time I've behaved like a traffic cop, and I totally was not entitled to do it.
Right, we're going to go on 11 years now. We're coming up to, I wouldn't say more modern times, because it's still nearly 40 years ago, this. 1987, Liverpool won Sheffield Wednesday 0.
Yeah, this is a rare accolade. I'm sure it's still in the football vocabulary now, but the Liverpool boot room was the place where all these great teams, all the thought processes went on. And it wasn't anything other than, it was literally a boot room where after games, before the games, the coaching staff would meet and do whatever they had to do on a match day. And then afterwards,
and the Liverpool manager always came from the next one down in the boot room, from Bill Shankly to Bob Paisley.
Everybody who was Liverpool was entitled to go in the boot room. Everybody behind the scenes, the staff and everything. And Roy Evans, who was on the staff, a very junior member of the staff, because it was Christmas, he said, "Go on, you can come into the boot room." And I went, "Are you sure?" And yeah, you come in. So it was a real honour to be asked, because I didn't know anybody else outside of. David Pleat told us when we interviewed him about how he the opposing manager was always invited in, and then their brains were picked. He said it was very shrewd of Liverpool. There was nothing to pick my brains about, really. But I don't drink, so it wasn't a problem for this kind of driving home for Christmas. It was so I had a soft drink and congratulated everywhere that they'd won the game, and I'm sure Sheffield Wednesday were represented in there as well. But it was just being in there and seeing. Of course, it was nothing other than a boot room, but with people, the great thinkers of football, a great football club. So it was a real, I regard it as a real honour, but I also knew that there was a very limited time that you weren't in for the evening, so to speak. And of course, the links between old-fashioned football and the media were pretty, not frosty, but they were like, people didn't mind what they said. The coaches would slag off the press. It was all sort of, just accepted as a part of the banter of the day, really. Anyway, and I said, thank you so much. You've made my Christmas. It's an honour to be in here, and I'll never forget that, and I'd never forgotten it. And then Roy said, to show you to the door was like 3 yards or something like that. He went to the door, and Roy looked at me and said, just remember, I said, happy Christmas, Roy, thank you for this, it really means a lot. And he said, don't forget, when you get out there, you're just one of those bastards again. And I went, I know. It was said with a big smile, and and Roy went on to manage the club, of course, after that, so it was always something special. So it only happened because it was Christmas, so that's why it's part of my tales of the day,
I'm going from there through the 80s and into the 90s. From 1986 to 1991, I was providing club call for 3 clubs, Chelsea, Queen's Park Rangers and Wimbledon. And Wimbledon were different. They got into the top flight in, I think, 1985. And they were different from any other club in the way they were run. They were called the Crazy Gang for a good reason. They were utterly crazy. And one of the things that Bobby Gould, when he was manager, and he probably inherited it from Dave Bassett, but I wasn't there then. One of the things that he managed was no training on Christmas Day. Now, every club trained on Christmas Day, apart from Wimbledon. Wimbledon were expected to be like every other family on Christmas Day. How much you drank, how much you ate, they didn't give a monkey's, not anything at all. And you go in Boxing Day morning, and you probably go in a not a team coach, but a couple of minibuses to the game, and it would just be kids, not kids. They were grown men, but they're acting like kids, going to the game. Bobby Gould was succeeded by, I think, Ray Harford, and then Peter Withe did a year, and then not long after that, Joe Kinnear came in and was there for 7 years. And this was how Wimbledon were run through that. But I just want to go through the scores when I was around of Wimbledon on Boxing Day, because in 1987 they went to West Ham and won 2-1. In 88 they won 1-0 at home to Millwall. In 89,
that was a first division game. Millwall's 2 years. They got into the top flight.
In 89 they beat Charlton 3-1. They lost 2-1 at Forest in 1990, but in 1991 they drew 1-1 at home to Crystal Palace. It didn't affect them not training on Christmas Day, and it was obviously it gave them a positive mentality going into the game, and they probably hadn't sobered up. And it was Wimbledon really were the crazy gang. And
I remember going to do an interview at the training ground, which was just on the end of the A3 going up in towards Roehampton, and you just went to interview. I can't remember who the manager might have been then, but when I got there, they stranded Terry Gibson, who played in the cup final winning team, up on the roof of the training ground, and they couldn't get him down. And I went, look, we're here to do an interview. I don't want to go down, but can we film it? Yeah, come mate, do it. And Gibbo went, yeah, it's all right. And that was just like it was, and it is on YouTube. I think when I got pushed in the swimming pool Torremolinos in one of their cup runs where I was interviewing Dave Besant on the side of the pool, and then they charged us and knocked us into the pool. Yeah. So, special. Listen, Dave Bassett was a very good non-league player, played for England in the amateur international. I played against him a couple of times, and he was a real winner. He was probably, if you were playing against him as we were, you'd say he was a right narc, but actually he was a really effective player. And to take that, for me, to be there in those non-league days and then see them win the cup, beat Liverpool, it's astonishing. And the fact is, there's something about that part of southwest London, because they've rebuilt the club again after the MK Dons
betrayal.
Yeah, that's the best word, I think. And they are now, a very well-run football, and there are connections between the Wimbledon that was betrayed and the Wimbledon of today.
Yeah. And in 1988, when they won the cup, it was the centenary year coming up of the Football League, and the Mercantile Credit Trophy was introduced for 1 year. It was a Ken Bates idea.
I commentated on it
in order to make some money out of this centenary of the league. And Wimbledon's second game of the season, or third, because they played the Charity Shield, as it was then, now Community Shield, and they played the first league game of the season, and they were drawn in the Mercantile Credit in midweek to go to Newcastle, which was just ridiculous. So the day before the game, they train, and Alan Cork, another hero of Wembley and winning the FA Cup, and an absolute serial member of the Crazy Gang, Alan Cork announces he's ill and he can't train. So they train down at their old Richardson Evans training ground in opposite Richmond Park.
The one where Terry Gibson was on the roof of.
And then they go back to Plough Lane, the old Plough Lane site, to get the coach. And at that site, at the front of the stadium, was the Plough pub. And some of them go into the Plough pub in order to have a refreshment or two before going off to Newcastle. And sitting there having a refreshment or four is sick Alan Cork saying, "Nah, I don't fancy this game at all. I'm sick." And everyone just has a giggle and accepts it. It's just the way that club was run. It was, and they finished a couple of seasons high enough that nowadays they get into Europe. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's detail and data now, but spirit is something never to be overlooked.
And at a lot of the home games was the wonderful, wonderful comedian June Whitfield.
Yes,
who was big Wimbledon supporter. She was, yeah. That was brilliant.
I was listening to her on the BBC Retro, BBC Sounds, as Miss Marple. She was very good at that, but she was lovely to see, because she was a star, really. I mean, I know of a different generation.
She was a great interview if you were doing Club Call. Right, going forward to the end of the century then, 1999, Boxing Day.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one now.
Southampton 1, Chelsea 2. I was working with Just Chelsea by now. This was the game in which Chelsea fielded the first ever non-British 11 in English top flight history. Now, Gianluca Vialli was the manager. He did it. He selected the team. I saw the team. I never thought twice about it. And it wasn't until about 2/3 of the way through the game that someone in the press box said, "Hang on, there's not one British person playing." It wasn't something... Luca found out at the end of the game, I think, when I told him, when I went down from the press box. None of us, it just hadn't dawned, because to us there were just 11 guys in the squad. So the team was, in goal, the Dutch Ed de Hoy, right back, the Spanish Albert Ferrer, central defenders, the Brazilian Emerson Tom and the French World Cup winner Frank Leboeuf, left back, the Nigerian Celestine Babiaro. In midfield, Diamond midfield, holding the French World Cup winner Didier Deschamps. On the right, the Romanian Dan Petrescu. At the front of the Diamond, the Italian Roberto Di Matteo. And on the left, the Italian Gabriele Ambrosetti. playing number 10, the Uruguayan, Gustavo Poyet, and the centre-forward who got both goals in a 2-1 win, the Norwegian Torre Andre Flo. Now, it's not unusual to have a team with absolutely no Brits in it.
It's very unusual to have a team of all Brits.
Yeah. And it was a big fuss was made of it in the media afterwards. But all I can tell you is, just from guys who were working from day to day, it never dawned on anybody.
No, it just grew from the globalisation of the game, which, as the Premier League expanded, was only a logical thing. We're talking these days about lack of English coaches, English managers, and it's the way. If you open the doors to the world will come, and if you're selecting from the world for the global game, the chances are the local guys are not going to get so much of a look in, and nothing like a look in. And I was disappointed that that the loss of Gary O'Neill and Russell Martin over the same weekend, that took two more
English
British
managers.
Well, English. Russell was born in Brighton,
Yeah.
so and that's always a debate. But the Scots have said quite pointedly, it's over 130 years since there's been no Scottish managers in the top two divisions in English football. There were, we could look up the years, as we've been looking up years in our nostalgia, and find out that there were more Scottish managers at a period than there were English managers. So I've always felt that the shrewdness of the Scottish approach to organising football teams. But it is a consequence, and you can't have the worldwide feel to the game, which we're all proud of the Premier League, without this being one of the consequences of it.
We're going to fast forward to 2018 and the game that we were both at.
Yes, this is Boxing Day 2018. It was an evening kickoff on the Boxing Day, again, probably for television. I think it must have been 7 or 7:30. I'm not quite sure. It certainly wasn't. I think it was 5:30, because I was at the Woking game in the day, which was an early kickoff, and I'd been given this Chelsea game to commentate by Sky. And I've said before, we don't choose our games. We get told where to go in more ways than one usually. But so in between me being given the game and the game happening, Woking, somewhat surprisingly, under which I was assistant manager, had got to the third round of the FA Cup, and the draw actually took place at Stamford Bridge, and we were drawn to play Watford at home. So now I was sort of I was going to commentate on the game, don't get me wrong. I knew, I've been to Watford many times. I knew a few players personally. A few of them, Tom Cleverley had a real contact with Woking, so through a family background. So I did. We played the lunchtime kickoff, and then I drove up to Watford, and then just went back into my non-coaching persona, which is the most of my life, just as being the commentator. Parked up, got my notes, exactly the same state of mind as if I'd been going into any game over the many years I've been doing the job till then. Only to be greeted in the Watford tunnel by, hang on a minute. Well, you can't come here. We're playing you in a couple of, it would be 10 days at the most, I guess. But it was all very light-hearted, and the players like Ben Foster, Troy Deeney, they leapt upon it. Get him thrown out of here. You can't have a look. He's spying for Woking. But they took it all in very good part, really good part. But it's I suppose it's a moment where two worlds collide, really.
And the score in the third round of the FA Cup?
We lost 2-0, but we did pretty well. Will Hughes scored the first goal for Watford, and every time I see him, and he understand he avoids me now, and I don't blame him for that. I go, that goal, and he usually replies by saying, yeah, I think that was the last goal I ever scored. So January 2019, and then Troy was a sub, and he came on. We were doing all right at 1-0. We were doing okay, full ground, 5,500 live on BT as it was then, and Troy came on, and we'd had a bit of banter. I mean, very friendly banter. The dugout's very close at Woking. And he came on, and within 2 minutes he scored and put the game to bed, But it started, Javi Gracia was the manager, who was really wonderful to deal with. There was no snootiness about it at all. He understood what we were and where we were coming from. Watford made some financial gesture to Woking, thanks to Scott Duxbury, after the game, which was massively
Chief
appreciated.
Executive Scott Duxbury.
Chief Executive, yeah. And Watford went on to the final, and with all the Woking support, all on Twitter, everybody was wishing them luck in every round. They came back, didn't they, in the semi-final against Wolves from 2-0 down to get to Wembley. Of course, it all went sour on the day, but the following pre-season, somebody dropped out of the game, and I got a call from Richard Walker, who's an excellent member of the media team and is still with Watford now, saying, well, Javi says, can you get a team together for the Friday afternoon? I thought, well, whoever it was, as first players, and we're going to play. We need a game. Can you? And Friday, we're part-time, Friday afternoon, but Watford asking, Premier League team. So we cobbled together. We had 11 plus a trialist. And as opposed to the cup game where they did leave one or two out, and as I say, they played everybody. And we were 4-0 down, I think, and they brought on 8 internationals for the last 15 minutes. I think it finished 8. But it was lovely. We were welcome. They fed us afterwards, and everybody. There's still a bond between Woking and Watford today, and so very grateful for that. But it did, it sort of came to light, first of all, not with the draw as much as me being in the tunnel, being almost escorted from my rightful post. There we go.
Right, I've mucked up here because I missed one out, and I'm going to go back to it. 2002, and it's another Chelsea Christmas, and it's one with a painful memory for me. But for you,
no, it's a painful memory for me as well. Really, we touched upon it the other day. I think we looked it up. Our excellent producers found it on YouTube. You being the word, Yule tide. And Jason Yule, this was Charlton beating Chelsea quite handsomely on Boxing Day. I'm pretty sure it was Boxing Day. And Jason Yule hadn't scored for a number of games. We haven't checked that is, but it was enough for me to. I don't believe in setting up, writing things that I might say down before I go to games. But I did thought Yule and Boxing Day, so when he scored as one of the 4 goals Charlton got that day, I said something like. At Christmas, Yule's tide turns. I think something awful like that, the cheesiest remark, and it did sound pre-arranged. I didn't know he was going to score. That's the only thing I can say. But I had that Yule and Yuletide and being at Christmas in my mind. So apologies to anybody, but not to Jason, who's one of the friendliest guys on the planet. And I'm sure the fact that it didn't matter who said what about it, he scored, and Charlton had a big win over Chelsea.
Yeah, and not for the last time, Scott Parker tore us apart that game, and came to Chelsea after that. Didn't have a great time there. Had a lot of injury issues, but had a really great career. And now he's looking quite possibly at another promotion with Burnley. Good luck to him. Right, I'm going to come almost up to date. Last year, 2023, when for the first time in 28 years, the Premier League decided there was going to be a Christmas Eve game. I was absolutely fuming because it was Wolves versus Chelsea. And I decided I wasn't going to go. I'd watch it on television, and I just felt it was out of order. It was an interruption of family life, and I didn't want to go. But I have now a 97, then a 96-year-old mother-in-law up in the Wirral in the care home, and it was the first time that she was incapable physically of coming down south for Christmas. To the kitchen for Christmas. So at the last moment, it was decided that the family would go up there and spend Christmas Day with her in the care home.
Lovely. Yeah.
So I was told, that Wolves game? So my wife went up earlier. I went up on Christmas Eve, and I went to the Wolves-Chelsea game. The official crowd was 31,641, which is a full Molineux. The atmosphere was brilliant, which I didn't expect. For the home crowd, it was, quite frankly, it felt like, oh God, this is great. This gets us out of the home on Christmas Eve, and it was well appreciated. The away following was full, so the ground was full. Chelsea were crap and lost 2-1, which didn't help me. But it wasn't as bad as I expected. So my cynicism was actually burst a little bit, and I left. I was in the press box. I didn't even wait for the press conferences. I just left, got out, and went north. But it was. They're not doing it this year, and I don't think they'll do it again for a long time, if ever, because it was widely opposed in social media and in the media.
Yeah, it's just a sign of life changing, because we've lost Christmas Day football, which when I was first going to football, we had. And Christmas Eve was just the week leading up to Christmas. I mean, it was just another day, Christmas Eve. Christmas was the next day. So as long as you got out and got home, there would have been no 7:30 kickoffs or anything on Christmas Eve.
It was a 1:30 or something.
Yeah, I mean, actually, as you know, it's relevant. It's a nice story, Neil, but the fact I was invited I live near the Chelsea training ground, to some of the staff. The groundsman and his friends said, well, we're going to go and watch it in the local pub. Would you like to join us? And it was very, very convivial, even though Chelsea did lose the game. So it's a sort of, I suppose, a link to it. But if there'd been a game to commentate, if I'd been asked to commentate on it, I would have done it like a shot. I'd never, it's what you're used to. I learned, I hope, properly, that it matters to each generation sees things differently. My generation is passing towards the end now, so I don't think we've got any right to say it should be on the 24th or it should be Christmas Day. It's the people who are in the prime of their lives, and the kids as well. Would youngsters like to go and watch football as part of their holiday? I believe so. That's why football Christmases are so important. I think it's in educating people to the game. Maybe my first game was in the week leading up to Christmas, and I'm sure many other people's was as well. So I do think it's part of our calendar. It's something different that the other countries choose not to have and never had. So why should I'm not criticising them at all. But I would be lost. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice in emotion here. I would be lost without football Christmas. I'm commentating on Boxing Day and the 29th. And preparation on Christmas night has been something I've done ever since, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jose Mourinho, when he came over and experienced it for the first time, adored football through Christmas, and a lot of the foreign managers do. I'm going to finish by coming right up to date on this year, because for the last 3 years, helped obviously last season by Wolves, and this year again, I'm getting all my Christmas food from a farm shop, as you would expect from me, which is in the armpit of the M1 and the M6. So it's kind of almost in Northamptonshire, almost in Warwickshire, but I think it's actually
unusual analogy
just
for
in
food
Leicestershire.
To the armpit.
So
it doesn't quite sit nicely with the delights you're going to get from the armpit.
It's called Manor Farm. It's in Catthorpe, and it's just off the M1, but you can get onto M1 or M6 easily from it. And I've got Everton on Sunday the 22nd, so I'm driving back on the 23rd. Mother-in-law, a 97 care home. Driving back on the 23rd, dropping into the farm shop, and at 1:35 p.m. I think it is, my box will be ready, which will include a turkey and everything else that I pre-ordered. And the food is of a higher quality than you'll find in any supermarket.
I cannot believe that they are not sponsoring the podcast. I absolutely can't
I'll tell you what, the people who own it went on the news when the budget brought out inheritance tax on farms.
Maybe that's the reason why they're not sponsoring it.
Yeah, and complained. Yeah, they should be. But I've done it the last 2 years, and the food is it's just a different level. It's at a different level. So I'm coming down from the wheel, Monday the 23rd, picking up all the Christmas food.
So
With a cool
I'm
box.
speaking to the producers here. Are we doing the podcast early Boxing Day, are we? So we get some of Neil's cold turkey on
No chance. I've got 3 o'clock home to Fulham.
Oh, well, we could be here by breakfast time. There's no problem about that. Great. Honestly, I've really enjoyed going back down there. I'm sure many people have memories of football over Christmas. It is special, and I know you're a bit bar humbug about it, but you've actually spoken very warmly about it today, which has astonished me, to be honest with you. So have a great Christmas, Neil.
And you, Martin. And everybody out there.
Happy Christmas.
Ta-ra. Okay, that's the end of Christmas. Actually, I'm really angry with myself. I've sat here with a glass of water all the way through this. And
Cheers, Neil.
yeah, why not get the red wine out? Or the champagne.
You're safe with me because you can drink it all.